So welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining, and thank you very much to Andy Stewart for joining today. I'm going to hand over to Andy shortly. My name's Marty Jervis. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Thrive. What that means in a Thrive context is, apart from our CEO, who is a psychiatrist and also a keen researcher, I tend to try and bring the rest of what Thrive does together and make sure that we deliver on our commitments and make sure we put out things that are relevant to our audience. And I was very pleased to encounter, probably about a year ago, I'm going to guess, and we discovered that some of the challenges that the sector faces are pretty widespread, but not necessarily talked about. In so doing, we were lucky enough to meet Andy. So I'm just going to share a deck here, if I can get that bit right as well, because there's a couple of slides. We are definitely not going to PowerPoint you to death here. So we're going to have a really interesting talk as a result, really, of Andy's particular credentials in this space. My job is really to bookend it. So in order that you understand what's going on, I'm going to talk a little bit in the beginning and help you understand the format. I'll then come back right at the end if there's any outstanding questions. So please, we do want this to be interactive. Andy and I are going to have a bit of a chat anyway. So he's going to share a couple of really interesting slides at the beginning. And then we're going to make it very much a conversation. And that means I think we're quite happy to have questions and other people interrupting the chat. You won't be interrupting, you'll be enriching it. So please put any questions in the Q&A bit. Let's use that bit. If you want to introduce yourselves to each other in the chat section of the Zoom webinar, please feel free to do that. The brilliant James from Thrive will also be monitoring what goes on in there. So if there's anything that I know I sometimes put questions in the chat and vice versa, he will maybe answer some questions there. You will all get a recording of this and a copy of the slides afterwards as well. So you can relax in terms of asking questions about that. All right. I think that's all I really need to do, except a little bit about my perspective on what Andy brings to the table. He'll uncover much more about himself, and I apologise if this isn't bang on, but it's how I see you, Andy, in terms of my exposure to the great things that you've done. So it's a unique brand and blend of things that you bring to the conversation. You're a senior lawyer. In fact, you've been a partner for many years, and that brings you a particular perspective here, which probably isn't shared by enough senior people in law. I will suggest, I think we'll probably talk about that. You're going to be talking about your lived experience. This is a safe place for a conversation, everybody, just to be clear. And Andy will be very open about his chronic mental health issues. He doesn't mind me saying that because he's going to talk about them. But he was also lucky enough that his own firm granted him some time off in the end, I say in the end, kind of probably when they were aware of it, to actually study the issue both inside and beyond the legal profession. So that's a really interesting combination of things. And I should say, just for the avoidance of doubt, that any conclusions or anything we talk about are in no way related, to the firm unless explicitly mentioned, and they'll probably be the good things. They're not related to the firm and specific to the firm that Andy worked in. Okay, these are kind of what he's gleaned across the sector. So we don't want anybody to misunderstand that. And although the emphasis here is on the legal sector, we see and Thrive the same sorts of issues across a lot of what I would call the professional services sector, which tends to have senior partners at the top of it and work in a particular way. And I think, therefore, this will be something that will ultimately be transportable across multiple sectors. So this is all about better mental health to people. It's entitled The Risk of Increased Workforce Instability in the Legal Profession specifically, but I think it's going to be learnings across the board. I've done the introductions. I've waffled for far too long. Over to you, Andy, and thank you.
So hello, everybody. Martin has given me a lovely introduction there. I guess just to complete that picture, as he did talk about my lived experience, I am not a qualified mental health practitioner in any way, shape, or form. Ironically, bearing in mind, obviously, the all the skills that Thrive brings to this. However, what I bring is 20 years of holding down a job as a corporate partner in a large London law firm while suffering from depression. So I guess, I mean, I can chat as much as anybody would like about that, but in the context of today's chat, we're talking more about mental health and the potential impact on workforce stability in law firms. But the reason I'm so passionate about it is because I battled away for 20 years with that problem, and 19 of those 20 years I battled away without telling the firm in any formal capacity, and indeed without telling many of my friends and family. So I am the poster child, if that is the right word, for the stigma associated with mental health, even in today's much more enlightened times. So that's really just to give you, why am I even remotely qualified to join in this conversation today? That's why. So as you can see on the slide, we've got three overall themes. Is there a risk to workforce stability amongst lawyers arising from mental health? The next one, why does that risk exist? Which obviously answers the first one, I guess. But also, more importantly, what can organisations do about it? And to try and cover this, we're going to particularly concentrate on some statistics coming out of Law Care. That's the brilliant charity for the legal profession. They do a survey every few years. Their most recent one, 2025. So we're going to chat a little bit about that, and also to put things in context, we'll chat a little bit about what the foundations are for good mental health at work, and then, as I say, what can we do to fix that? And a lot of that will be about leadership and teamwork. So, what are these stats that we're worried about here? So, as you can see on the screen there, the Law Care survey revealed that 56.2% of lawyers can see themselves leaving their current workplace in the next 3 years. 32.1% can actually see themselves leaving the legal sector in the next 5 years. And another 32.3% were unlikely to recommend law as a career. And if you look at the current turnover rates at law firms, generally they run between 20 to 27%, with London at the high end of that, at around about 27%. If you compare those statistics, there is clearly a big risk that the legal profession is going to suffer from a drain of talent, while at the same time, if other stats to be believed, forgive me, you've got a raging battle for talent. So all in all, we think this is showing something, and that is the Law Care survey view too. This is something that really should be being focused on by the legal profession. I would also just mention in passing there that of the people who participate in that survey, 24% wouldn't talk about their mental health issues at work at all. Anybody who did might talk to one of their peers, even less likely to talk to HR. So a lot of this is still hidden behind, as it were, the normal working day. So next slide, I think probably, Martin, you got the next set of stats. There you go. So, the risk of burnout for lawyers is high. I mean, I think this is now pretty well understood. Obviously things have moved on a lot in the last few years, but there are still some really quite scary stats on the screen there. So this survey shows mental health issues in the last 12 months. 59.1% of participants in the survey said they'd had that. 50% say they've dealt with anxiety often, very often, or all the time in the last 12 months. And 43.4% are saying their mental health is being significantly influenced by work. And the survey also did, amongst other things, they actually asked a series of questions which are part of the World Health Organization Burnout Index measurement. And in that, without, I'm not the greatest statistician, but without getting into that, the figure of 13 is the score at which people are generally regarded as needing some form of mental health intervention. So, if you're scoring 13 or below, then you really should be seeing a mental health practitioner. The average score in the survey was 11.1. 59.1% of the people participating in the survey were below, which is a bad thing, this threshold point at which they should be seeking advice from mental health practitioners. So it's absolutely an issue that should be being considered in great detail.
Andy, but hasn't it always been like that?
So I think there is a big sort of there is still a big theory, and it'll be my generation, and people not that much younger who are still saying, well, for goodness sake, I survived all of this. It's always been like this. It's a fantastic job. It's challenging. It's stimulating. It's remunerating, but it's blooming hard work, and it always has been. So, really, people they should just suck it up, stop whining, get on with it. And I'm hoping that I've already given you an indication that I am of that generation, and that turned out to be fundamentally, completely and utterly wrong from my perspective. So, and I'm not alone. So that is, it is just a sadly misguided view. And there's a lot of stuff going on in society at the moment around, mental health and, benefits being paid out, which is causing it to be a political issue. We're not talking about people having a bad day. We're not talking about people feeling a bit sad. We're talking about people genuinely incapacitated at work or at risk of being incapacitated as a result of these issues. So no, it's not just. It has always been like this, but things have changed a lot, right? Things have, back when I was starting, there were no mobile phones, there was no internet. You were not on 24/7. It was, of course, hard, but when you went on holiday, you were gone. You had a couple of days in advance of going on holiday while you sorted out your holiday notes, but once you were gone, you were gone. You just didn't have that same 24/7 contact. You didn't carry around your entire life on a small box in your pocket at all times, no matter where you were. Cultural changes. I don't understand social media. I've never been a social media person, but it is absolutely magnifying imperfections at every level. And I would actually just say, because now that I'm in this new stage of my life as a mental health advocate, I have got involved in LinkedIn. So my first social media app, if you like, but I can really see how these things become addictive, because now I'm checking it every day to see if anybody has actually looked at my posts. How have they reacted? If nobody has reacted, I'm mortified. So I can, this social media stuff is, it's not for me, but it's absolutely causing or being part of the cause of these issues. And of course, you've got just a completely different global working culture. The law firm I joined had 20 partners and one office in 1984. Now it has, billions of dollars of revenue and countless offices and goodness knows how many partners. The world has just moved on dramatically. So, but what hasn't changed is even if you're the most passionate believer in that AI is the future, the law firms, in-house teams, they are still people businesses, and they will continue to be people businesses. They are the people are still the generators of revenue. It's a trust business. It's a relationship business. It still has people at its very core. So why wouldn't you devote time and effort and resource to looking into the mental health of those absolutely vital assets. So for me, this should be a managing partner's priority, not a managing partner's nightmare.
So thanks, Andy. And I think we'll come back to leadership later on and maybe make a distinction between being in-house lawyers and being in a practice. Maybe ask you, I think we're going to come back to leadership, so some obvious questions there. But perhaps if we kind of approach it from the other direction, what do you feel are the kind of foundation stones? What's a good platform, if you like, for good mental health at work?
So there are three key fundamentals. You've got work intensity, the right work intensity, the right level of autonomy, and psychological safety. And it doesn't take long to see why these are issues for the legal profession. So when people talk about work intensity and the right level, work intensity it's a combination of both the quantity of work and the quality of work. The amount of skill required to deliver that quantity of work. And so, when you're a lawyer, you don't have very much control over that. On any given day, clients can just pile intense work on you. So work intensity, big issue for lawyers. Autonomy. So the one of the vital things to people's mental health at work is to have some sense that you're in some level of control. You're not coerced by, you're not controlled by your work. You are able to, in some way, have a plan for the day, be able to be in some element of control, not constantly at the beck and call of others. Again, you can see immediately any professional services business, certainly lawyers, they are constantly at risk of somebody either with their own boss or a client effectively taking that control out of their hands. And then psychological safety, which is probably the most important for any organization, but certainly in this context. That's all about, are you working in an organization where you're not going to be punished or humiliated for having an idea or having a question or having a concern, or most importantly, for revealing a mistake. If you don't have a psychologically safe organization, those things get hidden and disaster lies in that direction. So those three things, Martin, are the keys, I would say.
Now that's really interesting, and I mean, psychological safety. There's a lot more teeth, or there's teeth that people I think don't understand about that in the law already, and there's more clearly coming from Australia in that regard. But I did learn long ago that lawyers are specialists in certain areas, so I'm not going to ask you about that bit of the law.
No, all right.
We've actually got another speaker on a webinar that will be talking about that later on in the year. But you mentioned resilience there. Again, you and I clearly, from the cultural references, are of a relatively similar generation. So again, I would hear people that would say, isn't it just, and in this instance, I'm going to insert lawyers in the sentence, but isn't it just about lawyers being more resilient?
So I think the answer to that is yes, but it depends on what you mean by resilience, right? So only lawyers can answer questions that way. So I think the mistake that has been made for a while now is to equate resilience with physical stamina. And you even hear of law firms bringing in Olympic athletes. I mean, the worst example I heard actually was bringing in a former SAS combat soldier, right? But so learning about resilience in the sense of understanding the benefits of diet and sleep and exercise and things like that, that is an important part of resilience. But resilience is all about understanding where you are on that stress bell curve that everybody will be familiar with. People need a certain amount of quote stress close quotes in order to perform well, but they get beyond that peak and start to fall down the other side of the bell curve, and that's when problems arise. So resilience is not about just making people fitter and fitter. They are not superhuman. An athlete trains to peak once every 4 years, at its most extreme, right? An Olympic athlete. And part of their training includes rest and recuperation and recovery. It doesn't involve training 24/7. It's so, and lawyers are the same. Lawyers, you can say, well, a lawyer's job involves lots of hours of hard work, and you've got to train to be up for that. That is true, but you've got to take breaks. You've got to get a chance to recover from those periods. So resilience for me is not about physical stamina, and people concentrate on that, provide training for that, and then effectively then say, so you're on your own. Just tough it out. And actually, resilience, I think, and I really wish people would teach this right at the start of lawyers' careers. Resilience is actually about understanding that you can't control the job, understanding that you basically have to embrace the chaos. That's a phrase that I was given just recently, and I really wish I'd picked it up 40 years ago, because you can't control the job, you can't control what's going to happen on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis. So don't try to be perfect. Don't try to control something that is, on lots of occasions, uncontrollable. And resilience is all about understanding that and recognizing that there will be days when you knock it out of the park, and there'll be days when you don't seem to get anywhere, and both of those things are perfectly normal. And understanding that, and not allowing that sort of quest for perfection and total control over your day to get out of hand, which they did for me, by the way. But that's kind of a separate issue. But they go a long way towards explaining my issues with depression starting 20 odd years ago.
Interesting. It so happens that's another topic that, in fact, I did a talk with Dr. Fonseca, as ever, him providing the clinical expertise and me simply asking the questions. But that was all about the dangers, and we actually cited a patient. He cited a patient that Thrive dealt with as a working example of the dangers of resilience actually ending up being worn as a badge of honor.
Right.
And therefore it becomes, again, something that it shouldn't be. So I think you touch on a good point there. It also happens I've got some familiarity and a great deal of cynicism about bringing sporting metaphors into the I'll call it the business world for the moment. But I did some work in there, actually, in my lifetime at Thrive. And there's something called the Yerkes-Dodson curve that they particularly, that curve is that they use in sports. And it goes back to something like 1912. So, it's well observed and well founded. And obviously there's been more and more things that they can measure. But the big difference, particularly nowadays, is that you can see what's going on with the sports person, even in the sport we know a little bit about, you and me, football. Arsene Wenger started measuring absolutely everything. You can see when people's performance drops off. You can see what they're eating. You can see all the rest of it. We can't see that in a work environment. Is kind of one of the biggest issues to me. So I think it is difficult to know when you are approaching that point of too much pressure. So I'm interested to know, and before I do that, I'd love to see some questions from the other folks who are here. I don't really like the sound of my own voice as much. So if there's any other questions you want to pop in there, please do. But I've got plenty for Andy anyway. But I guess, can you think of any things in the workplace that might help employers or even the employees better communicate in each direction that there is something going on? Because you're not measuring their sprint time and their recovery time and the rest of it. You're not seeing those things. So is there anything you think that the employee can do themselves, or the employer could do, or anybody else that's involved in the workplace, that could make it easier to kind of understand what's going on in terms of people going into the red zone?
So I think the I saw something actually just the other day. Somebody courageously posting something saying, this is an experience that this person had had. They had got overwhelmed at work, and they were really struggling, and they went and spoke to their boss, and were in tears at this point. It had got to that point, and um, the boss listened and said, "Okay, leave it with me," or words to that effect. Um, some days later, no other context. Some days later, that boss came back and said to this person, "I've been thinking about this. I've chatted to X. Um, Actually, we don't see a problem here. It's fine. Your workload is fine." And that person, was just crushed by that. So when we talk about psychological safety, that's exactly the sort of thing that we're talking about. Well, why this doesn't work. So if you're going to encourage the ability of people to feel safe enough to say, actually, I am struggling here, then you've got to have a culture, and workplace culture is such an ephemeral thing, but you've got to have a culture that means that person feels safe to say that and won't be hammered by it. The stigma that my head told me existed, and absolutely no evidence to suggest it was actually true, but that my head said everybody else seems to be fine. Nobody else seems to be struggling like I'm struggling. I better not mention it, otherwise all this will happen is I will get the sack. My career will be total, my income will collapse, and all the other catastrophic reactions to that. So psychological safety, Martin, I think, is where that all comes back to. You create the environment that allows people to be to brave enough basically to admit that would be the start.
In which case, Andy, and big thank you to Miles P for putting the first question in there. I'll come to that in a second, but you take me naturally, I think, there. You mentioned the boss, you mentioned that. So this is the point I have to say. Surely it's just a leadership thing, this.
Well, I mean, I think it absolutely is a leadership thing. But leadership is at all levels, right? People talk about the culture of an organization. They'll say we're really proud of our culture, and I've had lots of conversations with lots of people in lots of law firms who've said something like that, and I'd say, "Oh, that's fantastic. So what is this culture?" And I've yet to hear an answer. So the leadership, you can have the person next to you with one approach to working in a legal environment. You can have somebody on the floor below with a completely different view. Same law firm, completely different approach. So culture leadership is absolutely vital, and it starts at the top. But effectively, everybody in some way, shape, or form has a leadership role in this context. If you're managing a trainee, or you're working in a team of 3 or 4 lawyers on an M&A job, or actually usually 10 or more lawyers on an M&A job, with help from other teams. So it's incumbent on you to lead by example, to admit your own failings. I mean, how many lawyers have you come across where you'd walk away from any kind of conversation with them convinced that they've never made a mistake in their entire professional careers? And I've made millions, and by the way, I can recount every one of them that I know about. Never mind, I don't know about the ones I don't know about. I've just tried to leave behind. But it's all about that kind of making it the norm to talk about this stuff. And if the senior, the better. The more senior people who say, "No, I've been battling with this stuff for years, and yeah, on a Sunday night I'm I'm starting to worry about what the heck the week is going to bring, or or I'm going to, the run up to a big meeting, I'm going to be not sleeping the night before because I'm, worried about how it's going to go. These are things that the rest of the organization needs to hear. So more leading by example, more showing vulnerability, more asking for help. More senior people asking for help normalizes asking for help. Amy Edmondson is the guru on this stuff. And anybody who wants to know more about psychological safety, apart from all the Thrive experts, Martin, but Amy Edmondson is the one who writes the books on this stuff. I would recommend you dig into that. Does that give you enough of that for the minute?
I think it does, and I think you've touched on. You've used the famous Drucker quote about culture, and indirectly there, I think it is about culture, and I think it is important that senior people do that. But equally, when I did some work in leadership consulting, the best, it was actually a head of HR for a company who also happened to be the person that invented the blue line pregnancy test as a piece of complete trivia for you. But I asked him as head of HR for a very large organization how he defined leadership, and he said leadership is the sum of followership. And I'd stop with that one because I think there is, we all know the leaders in our organizations, and each of us can be a leader. I know it's very cliche, but we can. But more importantly, we each owe a duty of care to each other in the workplace as well. And this is where we can kind of take our responsibilities here in terms of mental health to look after ourselves and look after our colleagues. And that to me is all wrapped up in leadership here.
It is. Sorry, Martin. Just because a couple of things. One was the best culture quote I've heard so far, which I would pass on, is a guy called Graham Alcott, who I heard speaking, and he said culture is what it actually is the worst thing your organization allows to happen within its four walls. That you can talk a great game, you can write your values on a piece of paper and stick them on the wall. And by the way, if you do that in a law firm, your entire workforce has spent their entire career pulling words apart. So if you write those words down as a set of values and you pin them on the wall, and then you don't abide by them within 24 hours, they are toast. So that culture thing is as I say, it's ephemeral, but creating a really good culture is hard yards over a long period of time. Creating a bad culture takes minutes. And kindness, you touched upon the looking after each other, and this is this is one of these things where I've never really understood. That's not quite true. I've got more than enough cynicism in me to recognize that ambition and lots and lots of different personalities and everything means it is, these things are easy to say rather than easy to do. But goodness me, why can't kindness be right at the core of the culture of an organization? And kindness is not pulling punches in an appraisal and saying, no, you're brilliant, when you know they're not. That's not kindness. That's the opposite of kindness. But looking after each other, looking after yourself, being kind in a professional context. I mean that you build that into your culture, happy days. Mental health issues will improve hugely.
That's absolutely right. You'll find more of them, but they'll improve because the people will be more open and they'll report to them, and we know that. So, so I'm going to ask Miles this question. Thank you, Miles. Which is, what steps, Andy, do you wish you had taken on a day-to-day basis to preserve your mental health while still embracing the chaos? As you say, that is to a large extent, an inherent part of the job.
So, obviously. But by the time I was really beginning to understand this, I had a huge number of ingrained habits which were hard. So I'm still now, 20 years on, still they're still there. So I became much more aware of the need to step away, much more aware of the need to put the phone down, much more aware of how small breaks in a day can make an enormous difference. Lunches for wimps, one of the worst movie lines of all times. Utter nonsense. You don't have to go and have a 2-hour boozy lunch, but 5 minutes in the fresh air helps you to reset, just breaks that constant stress pattern of the day. I am a massive believer in meditation and mindfulness, and I know there will be people who hear me say that and go, "Oh no, for goodness sake, another woke comment." Absolutely not. I really would encourage people to give it a go. It requires a bit of work. You have to. I mean, when I still see my therapist, whatever it is, 25 years or 20 years or so since I first started seeing him. He worked hard to get me to buy into that. I had all the cynical reactions to it that I'm sure many others would have. But once I'd got there, that makes an enormous difference. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes of just doing whatever meditation exercise you like. Mindfulness stuff for me, breathing. There are lots of apps out there. Headspace, Waking Up, Calm. They are just good ways of breaking the connection. The YouTube. You tell me when you want me to start, Martin. Sorry, but YouTube. What an amazing thing that is. Worked for me to a 5-minute clip from Blackadder, a 5-minute clip from Mock the Week, Graham Norton interview clip, made me laugh, move back on again. That's those things are sort of little hacks for the day. Bigger things, holidays, I'm sure we might come back to that sort of stuff, but taking them properly, having a life outside of work. You're on I'm on a roll now, Martin. I've got lots more. I'll stop because otherwise we'll lose the whole chat to it.
Oh, well, that's okay. Thank you. And we may return to that, but I want to thank Miles again for his question. And he says, couldn't agree more with this analysis. I'm a huge advocate for a well-being time recording code for those of us who record time. And I love that idea.
Yeah. And I'd love it to count towards billable hour targets. Yeah. If you can make that stick, happy days. Yeah.
Yeah. And still, we may have to wait a while for that one.
Yeah,
but that'll be a sign of leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
or an organisation somewhere. Good. So, I think the other, I'm obliged to have a plug and say we've got some very good deep muscle relaxation in particular, along with some of the mindfulness stuff in our app as well. I will give you a download QR code just towards the end for anybody that's interested in that. So this psychological safety is kind of a very big subject, I think, and it wasn't something I have to confess that I was particularly familiar with until I came into the sector. I suppose I was, but it didn't have that badge on it. So if I look at it the other way around, you've talked about a couple of things that are components of psychological safety, clarity in task, assignment of work, and so on. Could you kind of just give us if you don't mind, a quick checklist, if you can think of one off the top of your head, of the components of what is psychological safety?
You mean in addition to that? Psychological safety is the sense that any member of an organization has that they won't be criticized for admitting something less than perfection. And
I guess what I'm trying to do, Andy, is you said
sorry.
quite a few things which I think are implicit in the recipe. You know, I've made a gin and tonic, therefore there's gin and tonic in it, but I'm kind of almost asking you to unpack it a little bit more, because you talked earlier on of things to me that implicitly suggest that, you know, you need to understand, I don't know, the impact of your behavior on somebody else. Now, you talk about leadership from the top. So I just, yeah, maybe, I mean, and feel free, we've got plenty of other questions if you prefer another one. But if there's a way of breaking that down into just the bricks in that wall of psychological safety, that might be helpful. If not, I'll ask you something more challenging.
So the it's it's all about it's all about leading by example. So sorry, Martin, if I'm not picking up the question, but by all means, pull me up. But it's all about leading by example. And you know, I'll give you another example to the one I gave earlier that.
I think, Andy, I think, but surely there is, again, coming back to the followership, there is you can lead as much as you want. What if people aren't following? What if you and I might say that's the right sort of leadership? So is that a psychologically safe environment or not? There's nuance in here. I don't necessarily know what psychological safety means, and I don't necessarily know as a co-worker or a colleague how to respond to that.
So you have to just keep pushing and pushing the right behavior from the top, and the longer and better the examples are of good leadership in this area and creating the right environment, then the more it percolates down through the organization and the more it becomes part of the culture of the organization.
So not being a lawyer, I guess the question I was struggling towards, and I've now found is, so who do you think should be involved in what are the right behaviours?
So everybody, but if you don't, you have to have, it has to start at the top. You know, if the top of the organization doesn't not only behave, so the top end of the organization can talk a good game about psychological safety, but it then has to absolutely deliver on that. And then having shown themselves to be actual believers in it rather than just saying the right words, then you also have to start to be much braver about how you run your organization. So if you see bad behavior, then you have to call it out. You know, that's what really good leaders find ways, and law firms, it's really hard. If you've got a multi-million pound revenue generating partner who is a managerial nightmare, apparently, if we just assume that that's a possibility, right? Then what does the law firm do? Now, I would say the law firm should help this person who is the management nightmare to help give them training, give them feedback, give them all the access to skills to enable them to not only be a brilliant revenue generator, but also a great manager, and not a management nightmare too. But if that person just fundamentally can't do that, then that's when you're starting to say, well, what do I want in my organization? And this is obviously where the difficulty is for a law firm, right? Do I want that revenue, or do I want that? Do I want better behavior? Now, I can easily say now, having retired, obviously the answer is the better behavior. It's a gutsy call. I can absolutely see how that can be difficult. But though there's a real in law firms, there's a real tendency for people to be promoted into management roles because they are good at generating revenue, and those two things are not necessarily the same. I mean, people who are much better psychologists than me might even be able to draw a direct correlation between, the best managers and not, don't have the characteristics that make people a brilliant rainmaker. So, you've got to find ways of promoting the right people for the right reasons and finding the right balance between, you've got to have your star striker. I understand all of that. And there are, can we use Eric Cantona as an example, right? So Ferguson, apologies if this is a generational issue, but, Ferguson, absolute stickler for a whole bunch of rules, didn't apply them to Cantona because Cantona brought other things. So I get that, but, those other things still can't be nightmare stuff, right? If you give somebody a management job and they're rubbish at it, that you are creating a whole set of problems that the revenue just doesn't generate. So working hard to deliver that within an organization is absolutely vital.
I think that's good sense, and probably a lot of people on the call have met that apocryphal lawyer that you describe. But I can tell you that is not unique to your profession, trust me.
No.
But I think I think I would then like to ask you the question, and I'd also like, again, to do a bit of a shout out for any questions that anybody has. But I'd be interested if you could put in the chat just whether you are work for a law firm or in-house lawyer. That would be interesting to see the split out there from those people here, if you don't mind. But that takes me back to my question. Do you think there are, or what differences do you think there are between in-house and working for a law firm in this context?
Probably not many. I would say. I think I did do a couple of spells working in-house on secondment, although I didn't say this. I mean, I worked for the same law firm for the entirety of my career, but at various stages I had secondments out to clients, and those in-house lawyers, they worked every bit as hard as I did. They frequently had less backup. In a large law firm, there was always an expert that I could go and get advice from. If you're a part of a team of 2 or 3 or even less, there's a lot of stresses and strains just from that. In-house teams can have even less ability to control what's going on. You can have a boss saying, I don't care what level of quality you deliver, we just need this done. Right, that of course, that's really, really hard for a lawyer. A lawyer can understand that fundamentally it just needs to be roughly right, but it's very, very difficult to so completely suppress your desire to get something properly right, to be able to deliver on that. The great in-house lawyers are the ones who can deliver that quickly and accurately, without all the bells and whistles that necessarily go with a big law firm trying to answer the same question. So I would say there's very there often is not much difference. Maybe around the edges different stresses and strains, but fundamentally still the same job.
Brilliant. And this is probably a no-no in questioning technique. I was always taught it was, but nevertheless, I'm going to break the rule and ask you a double-headed question. So, aside of the great work you've done today, thank you, and I know you're starting to do it in terms of educating people on this. I've seen the thing on YouTube, which is brilliant, and thank you very much again for coming today. So aside of this, which is very, very important, in what other ways could you help either an in-house organization or a law firm, whatever, is there anything, sorry to put you on the spot, is there anything Andy could do or would be interested to do or is happy to do? And at the same time, the other bit of the double header is, are there any other resources, apart from you, that are out there that you think are particularly helpful for the profession with regard to mental health?
So to pick up that last bit first, just because that's easy. I mean, there are lots of resources. The two best ones that I've come across by a mile are something called the Mindful Business Charter, and Law Care that we've already highlighted. But both those organisations have a fantastic amount of material for people to look at, and also access to people to talk about things. From my perspective, I've known for a long time that when I got to the point where I didn't want to be a fee-earning lawyer anymore, that I wanted to try and help lawyers not get into the situation that I found myself in, and that's been a big. It took me a long time to try and figure out how to do that, but I knew fundamentally that was what I wanted to do, and I couldn't really do it any sooner for all the stigma issues that I've already talked about. But now I will, with some sort of reasonable limits, pretty much do anything to help. So at the moment, I'm talking to about my personal journey. I am trying to be that person who leads by example, and I'll wander into any organization who's remotely interested in listening to some person try to articulate this stuff. I'll talk to anybody who wants. If you find me on LinkedIn, you'll find my contact details there. If anybody just wants to, as it were, pick up the phone and say, look, I am struggling with this, but if you what can I do? I can't provide you with mental health advice, but I can certainly chat about my experiences and help you to arrive at some sort of sensible next steps about where to go, what sort of person to speak to, that sort of thing. So I will I just want to help. This is an unbelievably important issue for individuals and for the profession. And although the world has improved dramatically in the last few years, it still has a long way to go.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's a kind of, I've just flicked in the presentation to the page that has your LinkedIn details. Of course, everybody will get a copy of this presentation, and we'll include a link to the Mindful Business Charter as well when we send out the details. So I think as we move to, I could ask you questions all day, as you know. So hopefully the questions have been not too unfair.
No, not at all.
For being on for responding so well. If I summarise a little bit, I think what I've heard that it's very much about these three foundation stones that you talked about, which was work intensity, work autonomy, and psychological safety. And I think a lot of people have autonomy as part of psychological safety. You talked about that. You talked about the resilience aspect. We then spent a lot of time really talking about and floating around leadership and the fact that it's everybody's responsibility really to participate in that and help create the right culture. You didn't, but I did talk about duty of care, and you acknowledged that as well. So I think that's been really helpful. There's a lot of stuff people can go and look at on psychological safety that's out there as well. I think quite a lot more that's coming. And I think also by implication, we've said it's a team thing. It is for the team itself to take responsibility. So we have responsibilities of individuals and responsibilities as a team. And I think this also came through in the great, Johnny Murphill's fabulous Keep Britain Working report, where he talks about the fact that everybody's expecting somebody else to solve the problem. And really, this is a problem for, in this country, the NHS provision, it's a problem for employers, but it's also the individuals in the workplace, and everybody needs to step up. And I don't think that there's anything unique about the legal sector in terms of that overall motherhood as well. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
So I think teamwork is really strong. So thank you very much indeed, Andy. I will just flick back to the thing I was going to go through. If anybody is interested in the Thrive app, we have an app. The app is the gateway to the full Thrive service, and that's just about making sure that there is a safe and anonymous way to check in on your mental health every day and get the help you need. Exactly what is appropriate for you if you need it and when you need it. But if you like, the app is the gateway to that. So anybody wants to download that either now from that QR code or in the details that we send on, then feel free to do so.
I can see calm breathing activities even on the yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Well, I don't want to go too far into talking about Thrive. This was for the ecosystem. It was very much for a subset of the ecosystem, and we're very grateful to everybody that's attended. We do a lot of kind of horizontal stuff. So we've done stuff on psychological safety and health and safety and various other. We did the last thing that we did was on women's mental health. So that's the last thing that I did. Dr. Fonseca did one in between times. So we do a lot of different content, but this was very specific and really, really helpful and powerful from my perspective. We'd love to get feedback from the people that were on the call, because that's what it's all about. So please feel free to provide us feedback for that Help Her Thrive link that's in there. Meanwhile, it remains only for me to thank everybody that's attended. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your question, Miles. Everybody else is a little bit quiet, but that's okay. Shy lawyers, didn't you? and above all, thank you for all the work you've put into this, the work that you're doing in general to publicize this, which is so important, especially in this profession, as we know, and for being such an articulate and eloquent person to chat to. So, absolutely, thank you very much indeed.
You're very welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Okay, bye now.